Hey guys, welcome to the 8th installment of our discussion of Simone de Beauvoir's The Ethics of Ambiguity. Before I wanted to get started today, I wanted to tell you about paddlenova.com. It's one of our friends, and they're having an event, a Memorial Day season kickoff. If you want to do that whole paddleboard thing and bar and yoga classes and stuff like that, you should check it out. All right, so today we're going to be talking about pages 94 through, I believe, 120? Is that what we prepared for today?
Yep.
As we do with each podcast, we should go over what we covered in the previous podcast if there were any lingering questions or concerns. I actually was pretty satisfied with what we did last time. I don't know. What about you guys?
Thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
On to the next thing. I think
yeah.
we're good.
All right, well, let's jump into it. So we're gonna be talking about a little bit about politics today, specifically how Simone de Beauvoir relates to political structures. And so far, I mean, Jordan, what have we covered so far? Like in terms of where is a lot of her political animosity directed?
Oh, good grief. Well, she's basically thrown a lot of stuff out the window. So at this point, her leanings are more towards capitalism. She's not crazy about Marxism, clearly not a fan of fascism. So capitalism is where she's kind of leaning.
One would think she's leaning that way, but I think after this podcast today, we'll see that it would seem like it would be the default posture that if she's anti-Marxist and anti-fascist and anti all these other things and anti-anarchism and stuff like that, it would seem that capitalism might naturally be where she rests. And I think I still think it might be the case. But she's going to vivisect and demolish a great deal of the capitalist structure as well. I think CJ wanted to add something to this. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to sort of proceed with that. And one of the first sort of critiques that she has against the capitalistic structure, right, is that she thinks that it, by its very nature, it necessarily oppresses Native people, that it exploits Native people, that it puts them to work in the capitalistic machinery, whatnot. So much so that what do they do? What do people end up doing? The whatever a Native person is. What does she think is like the only real resort for such individuals who are oppressed? How can they disclose their being if they've been appropriated for this capitalistic machinery?
Well, it's revolution or revolt. I mean,
no, there's somewhere in between. There's a step prior to that. She thinks there can be minor effusions of being.
Well, I mean, doesn't she stipulate that the oppressors have to have a conversion?
Well, before any of that, so revolt is very likely, but something that happens before revolt is possible is that she thinks that Native people who are appropriated for the capitalistic machine are given over to frivolity and festival. She says that, so like things like Mardi Gras and Carnival and whatever else, people engage in these behaviors, these rituals, these outpourings of culture as a way to protest against the structure that they've been subsumed beneath. Okay? So what do you think about that? Does that, like, in a way, it sort of makes sense. And it's not just like a Native people thing. I see that with everybody who's sort of trapped in sort of the 9-to-5 grind. Like people go to Bonnaroo. And so I worry about her confining it to Native people because it sounds like she's like, us white people don't do that. And people who have a different skin color than us, they engage in festivities. But I think we all know that festivities are a huge part of Caucasian culture as well. Coachella, Bonnaroo, I don't know, Comic-Con, like all these, there's festivals and conventions everywhere. And that this is not so much a result of being a Native person, but people seek these things out as a result of having their being closed off to them and being a part of the capitalistic system. Yeah. What do you guys think about that?
I wonder what she thinks about these festivities losing their sort of protest energy and becoming more subsumed in a kind of consumerist culture. I mean, appropriation is always a big word in regards to these things too. When you think of, Mardi Gras or Carnival, where you say, oh, well, the original meaning of these festivals is kind of undermined by a sort of, oh, let's just make money off of this sort of thing. So I'm wondering if perhaps there's a sort of line that can get crossed where, at first it's protest, and then it just kind of becomes another sort of capitalist thing where even though it was an escape from the system, you're still in the system.
I completely agree. I've witnessed this firsthand. When in my youth, I used to pay lots of money to go to these festivals. Like I've been to South by Southwest and I've been to Coachella twice. If you wanted me to go to those things now, you'd have to pay me. Like I would never do it again because it has been so taken over by the mainstream sort of corporate culture. But what's interesting is then what happens once one of those once one of those protest festivals against the machine or whatever becomes part of mainstream culture. What then happens? New festivals spin off. So then like if you're really in the know, you don't go to Coachella, you go to like Psych Fest in Austin, or you go to some like really unheard of thing in like the Bay Area or Philadelphia or something like that. Like they're just become rebellions against the rebellion. Oh, this is too much corporate sponsorship. So we're going to create something that's more authentic. And then this cycle just kind of goes on and on and on forever.
So is that maybe a negative aspect of the system in itself, that it'll just it's not even entropy, but it just gets to a point where corporate, or I guess just all this business kind of goes into it and it loses its luster, and then it gets weighed down by the thing that it was trying to go against. And then, okay, let's form another one, and then it's going to get too popular, and then let's do it again.
Well, I mean, if we refer back to the text, it's my interpretation, she's referring to folk culture. So folk culture is a lot of times a pushback against imperialism, and it's against assimilation. Yeah. So in my opinion, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. It's a lot of times, you see in oral tradition and a lot of stories and parables, you see that folk culture is actually a way to negotiate terms with oppression in a different way.
Totally.
So we're talking about Coachella and Bonnaroo, but I think that we're kind of seeing it through a very modern lens. And if we return it more to, think of like Aesop's fables, or 19th century slave tales in American culture. They're sort of thinly veiled stories about different groups in conflict and potentially working out resolutions or the triumph of the sort of disenfranchised group over those who are in power.
Yeah, totally. I think it's something really important to point out. The whole reason why I took it to like the bourgeois perspective, which I think really many of us inhabit, is that I didn't want there to be this sort of feeling that there was this us versus them thing. I wanted to universalize it. The reason why I included things like Coachella and Bonnaroo is that it's not like we're somehow intrinsically different. I wanted to say that this experience of having our being closed off as a result of mechanistic capitalistic structures affects you whether or not you're an indigenous person or you are an Anglo-American person like us.
And there's I was gonna say utility, and it's funny because Simone bashes the justification of utility, but the fact that through cultic celebrations, through festivals, religious, be it pagan or Christian or any other sort of faith, there is a function to it. And it could be Coachella, it could be Mardi Gras. There's still that element of cohesion where you invert the normal power structures.
Yeah.
So it can have a unifying factor and kind of create a plurality.
So it's perhaps dilution, saying like, oh, that, if you put these festivals through this system, that it gets diluted. Is that maybe is that the wrong word to say? Maybe more so that it's integrated, or that it's kind of like a a quilt. I don't know, where you just kind of quilt these things together. They have their own unity, but they're all sort of together, and they're all little patches.
It's a patchwork.
It's a patchwork.
Yeah, an example I would want to use is this festival that the Romans had called Saturnalia, and it was the one day where the order of the household would flip. So children would get presents, slaves got the day off, and the masters would cook dinner, nominally. But there is definitely that element of necessity of creating a sort of a social safety valve.
Yeah. So this is the thing, right? Is that if you take a more nefarious view, right, is that the reason why our political leaders allow us to have these safety valves, right, is to prevent violent revolution. So like it's actually in the power structure's best interest to allow for there to be these effusions of spirit, because it allows people to just kind of like get it out of their system, distinguish themselves from sort of the base cyclical animality of the world, disclose something in a moment, a weekend, they go on a bender, and then they're just so exhausted. They've had their being just deposited like that. And then you can go back and co-opt them into the mechanistic capitalist structure again.
Right. Why do you think we have weekends?
Right. Exactly. So in a way, your leisure time is to shackle you even more.
Or even think of, Sundays, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's God's Lord's Day. You can't, it's like you're doing all your other stuff, all your worldly things on the weekdays, and even on Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday is God's Day. You cannot.
So can you really?
that.
Yeah. So Jordan, can you still upbraid me for being a workaholic in light of all of this? The fact that I never want to stop.
No.
Well, anywho.
Bless you.
Well, yeah, because I got in a way, if I feel like if there's never really sort of rest or leisure for me, there's never really a moment where the disclosure of my being stops. Although I do like your point that you pointed out to me in another context where Aristotle pointed out the virtue of respite, so you can go back invigorated and do what you love even more, and disclosure being even more. So, something I want to talk about. So she's going to go against Marxism and capitalism, but if we don't allow these effusions of spirit in the festivals or whatnot, then like you said earlier, revolt becomes a real possibility.
Yeah, and I mean the way that I like to put it after reading Euripides' Bacchae is you gotta go crazy to stay sane.
And that's very interesting, because we touched a lot about that in our podcast with Nietzsche and Birth of Tragedy, which was kind of showing at least this other side that that we have inside of us, and that we need to kind of
she's got to
get in queue with that. Yeah,
she's got to be familiar with the Dionysian frenzy that Nietzsche talks about. I mean, look, like if Simone de Beauvoir was not going to have a blind spot in regards to Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and all the other continental philosophers. So what? I mean, are we uncomfortable with this idea that Simone may have been sort of indirectly or tacitly endorsing revolution? That if you have all this, if you don't have these opportunities for people to disclose their being, then then revolution does seem like it's going to be viable for her. Like I was listening to a podcast recently on Simone de Beauvoir, and someone was like, "Oh no, she's necessarily going to be a pacifist." I don't think so.
No,
I think under certain conditions, things can get bloody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that she, in a way, acknowledges that violence is necessary at some times. She still calls it an outrage. She doesn't necessarily say, "Oh, well, we need to kill everyone," but let's see. Well, I'll find the quotation.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it's going to be reserved for it's going to be reserved for very select scenarios. It's a necessary evil. So the question that I have here is for you guys, I want to ask you this, and maybe historical contextualization matters. Is she too hard on capitalism? For her to group it in the same category as Marxism and fascism and all this other stuff. I mean, look, capitalism is allowing us to do what we're doing right now. Like, we have incredible microphones, we've got the Apple computers and things like that. Now, for as many people that may be oppressed in that process, if you can use a capitalistic system to your own ends to disclose your own being, wrong or right. How do you guys feel about that? Like, I guess the thing is, like, I feel like it's a little bit sloppy for her to, put it in the exact same category as totalitarianism, but maybe it's a function of when she was writing this too. Maybe capitalism wasn't as humane as I see it now.
And do you think she's attacking it more on a structural basis and not really using historical examples? Do you think she's more attacking it on fronts of its tenets, or I haven't read it. So
I think it's hard to say. I think it's hard to say which way she's attacking it, because the thing is that the historical embodiment of a system is very difficult to distinguish from its actual thought processes, right? And we see this, Marxists would make the exact same claim, like, don't judge the empirical reality of Marxism versus Marxism, the idea, right? It was just like, the only problem with Marxism is that it got implemented improperly by tyrants. Had it been done by the good people, then being a Marxist wouldn't be a dirty word. So I don't know. I don't know if she can extricate it, but I think maybe I'd have the perspective to extricate the embodiment and the idea. So I'd like to get Jordan's perspective on this.
I mean, she says that in terms of a political system, a social democracy is the ideal government because it allows you to disclose your subjectivity. And it seems to me under that system, the only economic system that could complement that is capitalism. And I think that she makes good points about American democracy, saying that the American proletariat has become very lulled by the comforts of it. So as American workers don't demand much, because if I can buy that Ford, then I'm willing to shut up and put in an extra 20 hours of work a week.
Yeah.
So I don't think that she necessarily tears down capitalism, but she does make very fair critiques.
And I think what was really interesting what you were talking about, Luke, and what maybe she's getting at with capitalism too, is that there is this divide between an idea and then implementing an idea. And that because we are in the ambiguous condition, we can't necessarily create like, this is exactly what it's going to be like right now. Right. This is Marxism in its pure form. Like, we're going for a perfect ideal. Like, this is capitalism. It's going to be a complete meritocracy. You will get what you deserve. Like, all of these are based, I mean, it seems like all of these structures that we're talking about are based on ideals, or what is she, I guess she called them, just these values, these imposed values, and that to try and implement them in this crazy random world just seems kind of like there's going to be some kind of divide, whether that be oppression or just straight up violence. So maybe that's what she's attacking.
And not to mention, you have to confront the issue of societies, is that individuals make up those societies. So you might have a perfect blueprint for something, but it's never going to go perfectly, or according to plan.
And like we talked in the other podcast, proletariat's going to be different everywhere. Bourgeoisie is going to be different everywhere.
Right, because there's a geopolitical circumstance to take into account as well.
And even like some entrepreneurs are going to be different in this state, and some corporations are going to be different in this country. It's all going to be fairly different, and to try to impose some kind of structure and these imposed values is just going to be
like herding cats.
It's interesting that you mentioned herding or whatever, because she actually thinks that the capitalistic structure will reduce people to a herd. That one of the real concerns that she has with capitalism is it groups them together like they're going to be some sort of cattle. The concern about reducing individuals to cattle, right, is that they'll be so easily co-opted by the powers that be, right? That they can be introduced into global conquest, into some sort of materialistic sort of unfolding. So that's going to be a big problem that she has with capitalism. But I don't know.
I feel like the same could be said though for any other system. If people are serious or passionate, depending on the system, then if people are easily misled, then that could happen under any economic system.
No, that's true, Jordan. I think that's what she's getting at.
That's
really
what it seems to me, is if you have a herd of people, what does it matter
Regardless-
if they're tractable? You know,
regardless
if they're
of
easily
whatever
led?
they are. Yeah.
Well, I think that's possible, but I think the thing we'll have to ask here is like, even though she's an anti-capitalist, like you alluded to earlier, she is going to be very pro-democratic.
So I mean, you can't necessarily. Yeah, it just seems to me that with a social democracy, the only thing that would coincide with that would be capitalism. But I mean, that
we have a candidate out there who's advocating a different sort of view,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, but that also begs begs the question whether or not you can have a system in which we can have a sort of humane capitalism. I mean, can you reconcile mindfulness or fairness with capitalism?
Yeah, I think you might be able to. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second.
Or maybe not. I don't really know. I've read this really interesting book that talked a lot about chance and about the uncertainty of the world, and saying how a lot of the things that we think are, especially in a capitalist sort of view, or even, just the stock market, all these things sometimes are more chance-based than we think, and that capitalism is kind of this, I'm totally butchering his ideas, but he's sort of saying, I guess the author was sort of implying that capitalism, in a sense, like you'll have these big guys that rule, and then they'll just get demolished somehow. Like it'll just be like a random, and I guess the book's called Black Swan, like these like random events are going to happen and they're going to be out, then somebody else is going to come up, then something random is going to happen, they're going to be out, where it's just like there's just so much like that capitalism doesn't have that control, that it kind of just leaves everything up in the air, where luck can and chance can play
so
a
it's
role.
almost as if fortune can insert itself.
Right, I guess that's what he's implying, in the sense that if you try to control and say, no, you're going to stay big and everybody else is not, that there's some kind of flaw in that. So I don't really know if we can, and I guess maybe that's what Simone is getting at. Maybe I'm just kind of putting words in her mouth, but just like going off of what that one man was talking about, Nassim Taleb, it's sort of like just the ambiguous condition of the world, that there's so, like, I guess maybe what she's getting at too in this existential thing, that there's so much that we don't know. And even stuff that it's like, there's a lot of like known unknowns that we were like, I don't know the meaning of life, I don't know this. But then there's like these unknown unknowns where it's just like, I have no idea it's going to happen. Yeah. So it's just like, so it's like trying to like say like, yes, I know this, I know that, I know this, I know that. It almost seems kind of...
She emphasizes a lot in this text about how important the future is for validating the present. So I think that ties into what you were saying pretty nicely about we need that layer of ambiguity and uncertainty in order to make the present concrete. Does that make any sense?
No, that makes sense. Yeah, it just makes it very curious, at least what she's going to... I mean, I guess you guys already said it, but what system or anti-system... it's going to be a system, which is kind of ironic, or maybe it's not a system, what she's going to prescribe for something that can let us disclose our being.
I think that should be how we... To be honest, I think that we should marinate on that question at the end of our discussion, because I think that's going to be... a really fertile area of research for us. So I kind of just want to get through like the next page and a half that I have here. And then once we have all the information, we can sort of more speculatively engage that question, if that's okay with you guys. Sure. So one of the things I wanted to just say real quick here, we can obviously see, given everything so far, why the Hegelian Marxist rhetoric that's been going about in philosophy, why she's pushing back against that, as many problems as she has with capitalism, why that may be a rhetorical gift to a lot of autocrats and dictators and tyrannical people, right? Because just to reiterate it, I mean, and I have to go back and do a close study of Hegel, because I think I wonder how much people misunderstand Hegel and how much this sort of becomes a caricature. Not only do madmen who want to oppress individuals and their ability to disclose their being, but also academics who don't really understand Hegel and then work off a cartoonish picture of him.
But isn't that all philosophy, though, in one degree or another?
To some degree, but I want to be fair to Hegel to some extent eventually. But I want to go the extra mile. But I mean, the thing that the people who are more Marxist or more totalitarian in inclination, like the thing that they'll use Hegel and Marx for is that they'll tell this story about there's this unfolding spirit that people have to be sacrificed for. And that's a meaningful contribution of your individuality. And she's going to be very anti that idea. But there's got to be this, I mean, the thing is, underneath it all, right? If the individual life doesn't matter, right? If ultimately we're all only these temporary sort of iterations of this more gigantic being playing itself out in history, then I think, Simone naturally asks as a critique against Marxism, if one individual doesn't matter, why would an aggregate of individuals matter? Why would a state matter? Why would this unfolding matter at all? Like, I don't know who said it. I don't know if it was Carl Jung or whatever, but like, a million zeros don't add up to one. If everybody is hollowing out their being to become something greater, I mean, the still net result is zero. So, and this is why I love Kierkegaard, because Kierkegaard is going to be like, yeah, F all that, just concentrate on your internal value. And I think to be honest, I think Simone is a Kierkegaardian up until the ethical stage of existence. She just can't make the religious leaps. So, yeah, so I guess the only thing I've got really left here to say is like, what is left for Simone? What structure is left for Simone? If she's cast aspersions, she's cast poxes on both the Marxist and the capitalist houses, right? And Jordan alluded this earlier. Democracy is going to be something that Simone de Beauvoir is going to be comfortable with. Okay, why is she like what evidence does she have that our democracy is going to honor the integrity and dignity of the individual? And what safeguards does democracy necessarily have a part of it that allows for it to fit nicely with the existential system of actualization? So, and specifically the example, I'll shut up here, but do you remember what she has to say about war tribunals and how that illustrates the existential validity of democracy? Does anyone recall that?
Yeah, there's. Let me sort of ruminate on that because I think.
All right, nice I'll go ahead. So so what she says is like, and she's living in the aftermath of the Second World War, right? So the Allies, they win the Second World War, and do they just line up all the Nazi leaders and just mow them down with machine guns? What happens?
Sure, they all go on trial.
They go to the Nuremberg trials, right? Now maybe you could say, well, maybe we treated the Nazis better than we treated the Japanese because we did annihilate them with 2 atomic bombs. But she says the fact that democracies, even after a crisis is over, and look, there were probably a lot of people who wanted to just slit the throats of anyone who was associated with the German regime. Each individual was tried on a case-by-case basis. And look,
it's because it restores human dignity.
Yes,
and
talk about that, Jordan.
Okay,
talk about that.
You go, girls.
Yeah, you got this. So even if someone as heinous and just terrible human beings commit these just atrocities and these horrible war crimes, a democracy in reestablishing order and reestablishing and reaffirming the value of human life and the dignity of the individual, they have to extend the same due process.
Exactly. So rights are going to be extended even to people that we know
do not deserve them.
Do not deserve it and are beyond guilty. We're still going to afford them a trial, right? And that's why she's going to say that this comports well with the existential condition. If rights are extended to the most heinous people, then they're obviously going to be extended to the average person or the exceptional person.
Right. And I think there's a quotation here that follows the passage of her advocating, due process and a fair trial for war criminals is, if the individual is set up as a unique and irreducible value, the word sacrifice regains all of its meaning.
Right. You can't just
say that again.
Yeah, sure. If the individual is set up as a unique, irreducible value, the word sacrifice regains all its meaning. So you have to value all human life in order for sacrificing yourself for a country or cause in order to make it meaningful and valuable.
And what's really fascinating about that, you're talking about trials. I remember another French person, another French philosopher, Michel Foucault, talked about how at least there's this shift from charging somebody based on the crime itself. So, okay, you murdered all these people, you're going to die. Like, you're going to get the just punishment, to examining the person and saying, okay, this person might be a little insane, and therefore we cannot try them as a normal person because they are, or isn't there something like that where if like the person is mentally ill, then we can't necessarily punish them in a certain way, or I guess we can't just be like, okay, you're gonna get hanged right now.
Yeah, I mean, we make greater distinctions within a democratic society, whereas
where maybe sometimes that could lead to, I don't know, maybe some people saying like, oh no, he didn't get his just deserves because he was insane. Are you just telling me that he was just normal, and then all of a sudden, like, this kind of monomania, he just kills somebody out of nowhere, and we have to judge that as like, we have to be, we have to judge his individual self, and like, I don't know, maybe some people feel like, wait, that's not democratic, or maybe it is democratic, but it's almost kind of like a what? Like,
yeah, temporary insanity figures interesting into a conversation about judgment and punishment and things like that. I think about it a lot lately, specifically in regards to the Abraham and Isaac story in Kierkegaard and Fear and Trembling about, was Abraham mad or was he actually a knight of faith? Or I think about it in terms of that movie, A Time to Kill, where the father revenges the death of his daughter, who I believe was raped and brutalized. And, there are all sorts of questions about when a very just judicial system starts to break down, and maybe it can and cannot encapsulate certain elements of the psychological frenzy.
Yeah, and is there an extent? Yeah, is there a extent to which we can observe and protect the individual and their own being? I guess. I mean, is there a limit? I don't know.
I think you've got to take it case by case, and I think you have to be very deliberate about it. I don't think you have to rush any of it.
Or whether you just have to say the crime gets the punishment or something like that. Like again, this is Michel Foucault talking, but at least he explored how, at least back then, it's just like, if you killed somebody, you got this punishment. If you did this, if you libeled, you got your tongue cut off. Just like all these different punishments.
There weren't distinctions made.
There weren't distinctions of, being a person.
Formulaic. It was if crime A, then punishment B.
So as much as we may hate on our judicial system or something like that, and like sometimes it gets it wrong, right? There are a lot of cases in the American judicial system where like things, like the bad guy got away with it, and it seems like a lot of time,
or on death row, there are a lot of people on death row who
are put to death.
Who are there and didn't commit the crime, and there have been a lot of cases that have been overturned because of DNA, and people have been framed for it, and it's usually been
as imperfect as it is. I think as imperfect as it is, I think Simone de Beauvoir is alerting our attention to the fundamental dignity that it acknowledges in the process, even though it's still a human system that can be erroneous.
Yeah, that was going to be my thing, which I think you two were touching on. I guess we all were touching on rather clearly, is that even social democracy is a system that puny human beings made, and therefore it will be
flawed.
Yeah. And even,
That's what I like about Simone, though, is that she doesn't necessarily advocate, this is the perfect system.
What would she think perfect is?
An idea that's just floating in.
It would be an
pre-made value.
It'd be an unconditional value, and we know that Simone's all about conditional value. She knows the world is effed, and she knows we just have to do our best in it.
So then democracy then is one of those values too, where it's like, everybody has a say, or like everybody's going to be an individual, and we're going to be judged by our own by ourselves, not by our actions. Like, I'll be judged by who I am. If I'm a really like psychotic person, then like I'll just be put in an asylum and not killed. I don't know. I mean, it just seems like we're just left with just like, we're all just gonna like roam the world and just do what we have to do, and be moral. I don't know. Yeah, it's so fascinating, like you said, where it's just like she leaves no stone unturned. And she doesn't leave any stone uncriticized. So it's just kind of this point where it's like, where do we go? Which I guess, we're getting closer to examining, like, where do we go from here?
I have two little points I want to add on here, and then we'll just freely discuss. So the jurisprudence system necessarily prevents authoritarian leaders from suppressing the individual and restores the meaning of sacrifice, like Jordan mentioned earlier with that passage. The great thing about democracy, as well, in her perspective, is that our role as individuals is incredibly relevant within a democracy. I know a lot of people feel disenfranchised. That's why they join Occupy Wall Street or don't vote or do this or do that. But ultimately, the fact that we can openly criticize our leaders and call them into question whatever, makes it less likely that our voices will be silenced in sort of imperialistic aims or whatever. So whoever the next president is, it'd be a Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or maybe a third party candidate that's still out there or something like that. If they want to take us on some sort of imperialistic adventure or something of that nature, if there are enough of us that express dissent or something like that, like truthfully, we can disrupt this process so that we don't get sacrificed for it. And I think so. So what are we left with? So we know that democracy fits well with existentialism. The question is, and I think Jordan very astutely pointed this out maybe 20 or 30 minutes ago, how can you have democracy without capitalism? How can she be anti-capitalism but pro-democracy? And maybe there's some wiggle room if she talks about there being socialism, like social democracy. Like, I mean, this is what I guess the platform of Bernie Sanders is, right? Is that he is a social democrat or something of this nature.
Yeah.
And truthfully, I don't concern myself enough with political structures to understand the difference between it all. But maybe you guys do a little bit better. I mean, can she be in favor of democracy and advocate some synthesis or blend of capitalism and Marxism? Can she be a socialist? Or is she necessarily going to be a venture capitalist? I mean, what does her stance on democracy necessarily commit her to?
I mean, do you think that she is all for being one system, or do you think she's more, or do you think the ambiguous condition, regardless of his political aesthetic, whatever, that the ambiguous condition relies on us to kind of explore different things? It's almost like, like, what is it, the story of the fox and the hedgehog, right? Where the hedgehog only has one thing it can do, or at least to defend itself. It's just like, okay, get my pricks, and I'm gonna just prick you. And then the fox can do many things to escape. Is she maybe a proponent of being a fox, that maybe the ambiguous condition has so many different things, and to just kind of put yourself in a hedgehog little thing and be like, I got it, and then life just kind of like kicks you over and it's like wrong and like steps on you, like is she maybe a proponent of being kind of multifaceted and saying like, okay, I'm gonna, like you're saying, like take from socialism, take from democracy, take from capitalism, hey, little Marxist here, that's okay? Or is that diluting our own disclosure? I'm not really sure.
I actually think these are really great points that you're bringing up, CJ, because it seems like the democracy can be a more fundamental characteristic of the system, and then like what the actual economic structure is can come after the fact. Mm-hmm. So it seems like she's going to be that she can advocate more forcefully for democracy, but it would, given everything that she said about the proletariat and everything else that has come earlier, why could, if the democracy was a little bit more Marxist in nature in one country, why not be like the fox and adapt in that situation? If the democracy is a little bit more socialist in a country, then that's fine. If it's a little bit more capitalist in another country, that's fine too. What seems to be more primordial is the democratic part of it. Now we have to ask the question about
that,
what
that is. Yeah, and it was interesting, at least, is that's the hedgehog part too. Where just like it's almost like we have to like not reconcile it to, but combine it. Where it's like sometimes it's like, oh, you got to be more rounded. Oh, you just got to focus on one thing. Where it's like, okay, at your core is democratic value, is the disclosure of ambiguity. Like that's your hedgehog. That's your guy. Like he's not gonna move. But then you can kind of be a fox in like how you try to bring that about. Yeah,
I think that's a really
things.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think the way you've described that is really excellent. I think I never would have come up with that on my own.
Well, I got a little help from Isaiah Berlin and some old Roman guy. I can't remember what the myth came or what the fable came from. I can't remember what the story was.
Well, Jordan, do you assent to this view that CJ and I are kind of building consensus around? How do you feel about it?
That's the thing, is that it seems to me that Simone is much more how is it? Like, I would say not concrete, because I don't want to peg Simone in a corner here. But the system that she's most comfortable with advocating is a political one. And that political one is a democracy. And she doesn't necessarily offer a favored economic system. So I definitely think that provides maneuverability. And if we keep in mind that geopolitical factors shape the proletariat, maybe for her view might say it's so individualized, depending from country to country, that it may require sort of a Fox-like adaptable economic system.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think the question then becomes, and I don't know if we're going to have all the details in this text, right? Is like, all right, so if we agree that everyone ought to be a Democrat, but then what species of Democrat is going to vary on your geopolitical context. I think then the question becomes, what are the defining values of the Democrat? Like what basic rights does every democracy have to respect, regardless of how it's situated within a particular economic structure?
And that's the really, really tough part, is moving from that. I guess I think I used porcupine. I think it's a hedgehog. I think I got that wrong. But using like trying to get like the hedgehog in place, I guess, or getting like the one thing that we all can agree on. And maybe we just, and it might seem kind of pragmatic, but maybe we just kind of have to do the Venn diagram thing and just see what we all agree with and kind of go from there, and just realize that we do have different little parts of our circle.
Yeah.
But we do have parts where our
and Simone
circles
says that
interlap.
appeal is a huge part of getting movements to go forward and have momentum, and how the world should nominally work is that you can do, as much as you can do on an individual basis, but in order to make any sort of movement collective is that you need to appeal to others.
Yeah. Well, what I'm trying to figure out here is, so there seems to be wiggle room with the financial system that the individual takes up in. Is there wiggle room on what it means to have rights within the democratic structure?
I don't think so.
That seems to be a nucleus that must transcend the system, the economic system.
But then again, I guess it goes back to, okay, what rights do we have? Because some people think we have the right to bear arms and other people don't.
Right. And certainly that's going to be problematic on a more sort of, well, maybe not. I mean, I don't, there might be some variety, but I don't know. I mean, look, Simone de Beauvoir doesn't really spend a lot of time enumerating those things. I mean, look, as far as what we know, the ethics of ambiguity has, like, we know that it's got to sort of our liberation is bound up in the liberation of others. So everybody's got to have their ability to disclose themselves. So if the system can't be so onerous that it cuts off individuals from disclosing themselves.
Right. In the future too. I mean, she says that the future is essential. You cannot not verify, but you can't make your present meaningful if you have your entire future cut off.
Yeah. I mean, and that's probably the point too of this book, right? If she actually gave you the step by step, she'd kind of be a hypocrite, right? Maybe.
Well, yeah, I think
because she'd be saying like, okay, this is what you have to do. These are my, ready-made values for you, right?
Yeah.
We should maybe think about the context too, because this is from 1947, 1948. So if we think about it, I mean, this is very, very, very post-World War. I mean, she just might be pondering what could be best for the new world order.
Yeah, I don't. She may not know yet. She may
not even know. I mean, if
things are very much in flux.
Countries are rebuilding themselves. Yeah. I mean, the Marshall Plan, is just trying to get everyone back up on their feet. So,
don't you wish that she was alive today so she could sort of commentate on the trajectory of democracy? And I'll say this for those who are listening. For those of you that speak French, there are a lot of interviews with her from the 60s and 70s that are up there. I don't speak French, so I don't know what she's saying. I did find something on the Internet Archive where she did a conversation with a guy named Studs Terkel.
It was his birthday yesterday. Yeah. Studs Terkel.
It was Studs Terkel's birthday yesterday. Excellent. I don't even know who Studs Terkel is.
He's a writer, and he did this really great book called Working, which is essentially just a collection of interviews of people from an array of fields of work, and he's just talking to them about like what they do and what their work means to them, and it discloses a lot of interesting insight. And
he did one of these interviews with Simone in her home in 1960, and it was so. The thing is, I don't think Simone gets enough credit for her ability as a political theorist, and she never really proclaimed herself to be a political theorist or a philosopher or anything like that. So we're kind of focusing on a text. She's usually heralded, right, as everybody knows, as a feminist, a part of, I suppose, second wave feminism or whatever it's called. So everybody wants to know her thoughts on woman, but the stuff that I consume, people don't seem to be as interested in her thoughts on humanity. And I don't know, to be honest, I think she has a lot to offer here. I wish she maybe in other texts that I'm unaware of, she elaborates upon these very fluid ideas.
Yeah. Oh, do you mean on humanity?
Yeah.
She
not so
actually
much
has.
woman.
I bought a book, but I haven't read it yet. It was Simone de Beauvoir. She has this book called Coming of Age, which exclusively talks about aging and just like
it's her
being
memoir.
elderly.
Yeah, it's her
I don't know.
memoir.
I didn't know it was a memoir. It just
Yeah.
looked like it was more so just about aging and just how it's different, like how biology looks at aging, how through history we have viewed elders and aging. Like it's just this whole compendium. I'm sure she'll put her own opinion in there too, but it just seems like this whole history and examination of what it means to grow older. And I guess, yeah, maybe that is a memoir. And I know she has her memoir on her relationship with Sartre, or at least with Sartre. It was like
there's all sorts of stuff
Adieu
out there.
or something like that.
Well, that's all I've got for today. I don't know. I mean, do you guys want to add anything else? I think I've covered all the bases that I felt like covering.
Yeah, no, I
don't
think
know how
it's
much further we can go on these subjects without getting more material.
No, but I think we're left with a kind of hopeful sort of view. As much as we can say, like, man, we don't know. That's okay, and at least just how Simone, she's just like we said, like she doesn't have it figure it out either. And
She's definitely given us a lot. She's definitely pushed us in the right direction. I mean, I think the thing is, what's frustrating is that with books of this magnitude and any great philosophy book, we hope that it's like solved all our problems, but really, it's just like it's just one step forward in the march towards our existential freedom, or if you view it as a science towards truth or something like that. I mean, obviously, Simone wouldn't be comfortable with this idea of there being some sort of idealized truth out there, but like I don't know if we have gotten to the truth of the matter through this text, or we will by the end of it. But I definitely think we're closer than we were before.
No,
we can't get too frustrated if we don't have all the answers.
No, because sometimes I think I think we've talked about it. Philosophy sometimes it's just about asking questions. It's not really about answers. Right? I think maybe she's giving just a lot of questions and a lot of like, oh, you think that's an answer? No, it's not. You think that's an answer? Maybe it isn't. And just being okay with that.
Yeah, but this hasn't been a completely deflationary text. Like we have gotten some answers to some questions. It's just that it's opened up many more questions to us.
Or I guess maybe she's just like, okay, we have this ambiguous condition, now what?
I think what Simone does is a wonderful job of pointing out all the nuances.
So good.
Before you get on board with this, hold on, here's this to consider. Oh, but wait about you. Hold on. Think about this for a moment.
Yeah.
And so it's great because you just get kind of frustrated with it. You just think, let's get on board on the Marxist train. This is great. And then she's just like, hold on.
Well, something I've learned about teaching philosophy in this format and teaching philosophy all throughout every stage of my academic career is that the frustration is a good, right? Right. The wrestling is a good. The fact that like we're sitting here and there are probably people at home being like, why don't they just give us what Simone thought already? The fact of the matter is, and I was talking to Jordan about this on the ride over today, is that you learn more through the frustration and wrestling and trying to communicate it than others. Like we actually might, if we like distilled it down to an objective doctrine system that people are like, yes, I know what Simone de Beauvoir said and there's no ambiguity in it whatsoever. We actually might be dishonoring people by not being vulnerable and like openly struggling with this material on live tape. If we put ourselves up here as authority and be like, yeah, that's what Simone said, you don't have to wrestle with her or whatever, then people aren't going to necessarily make the internal evolutions of self that Simone's going to want them to do.
No, and I think that's maybe I think that's so true. That's exactly what Simone wants. Well, not saying that's exactly what she wants, but I think what she's trying to show, if she's trying to show us, if she's not trying to deflate everything, she's just trying to say like, look, this is the ambiguous condition. We all have to wrestle with it, and that like nothing is sacred, nothing is safe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. And the fact that like this is what it takes, right? Like this sort of struggle that we're displaying for everybody else, like this is what it takes to live a meaningful life. This is what it takes to live an internally justifying life. So yeah, you might be able to have a more passive life where you punch in, you punch out, and you do your weekend thing. You go to Bonnaroo and you wear you wear all the trendy clothes and have this ready-made identity. But it's ultimately vacuous. We have to do a lot of heavy lifting. We may go down some wrong corridors and stuff like that. But ultimately, if you do it properly, then you never feel disconnected from existence ever. At least I don't.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with that metaphysical privilege, is that by trying to tease out the nuances and meditate or reflect on that ambiguity, we're no longer sort of hiding behind our sort of metaphysical parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like toddling a little bit.
We're growing up before
life.
people's eyes right now.
Exactly.
Has
In
reading this
metaphysical
text
sense.
helped you be okay with ambiguity? If ambiguity was this kind of ocean, are you not like going against it, but you're just kind of like floating with it and letting the waves take you instead of just kind of thrashing?
Great book. I'm so glad that you brought this up, because it's this book on Indigenous and American Indian justice. And it has to do with the sense of a lot of Indigenous languages actually relate to, it describes things in terms of being instead of the concrete nature of nouns. So it reflects the actual sort of ebb and flow of the nature, and comparable to an ocean. So it helps you, instead of, in the author referred to it as you can either sit on your, mansion on the beach on a cliff overlooking everything, or in a more indigenous sense, you're in the water sort of paddling, almost on a surfboard, and you are actually in the water, a part of the ebb and flow and the tides.
You know what Ulysses S. Grant said, like one of the last things he said before he died? He said, "I think I am a verb, not a personal pronoun." And I think that's what we're getting at here, like with the ambiguous conditions. Like we're not gonna calcify. We're just gonna keep going, and we're just in our.
There's something I did a little. I've been doing some online curating, and one of the I came across this podcast. Let's see if I can remember it. It was done by. It's on the NPR One app. It's called Theory of Everything podcast. It's pretty popular, and a guy did. It's called Stages on Life's Way, and the first third is devoted to his own spiritual journey in relation to Kierkegaard's Stages on Life's Way book, but. He schematizes the other 2/3 of the podcast, along with the different sort of existence stages that Kierkegaard purports, specifically the ethical and the religious. And in the religious stage, he interviews a hospice worker and talks about how when we die, this social mask that we make for ourselves, like we're kind of in the process of making a social mask for ourselves with this disclosing and being like, we want to be taken seriously as intellectuals and innovators and public personalities and things like that. But what he hints about in his particular study of the dying process is that when you start to succumb to the necessity of degradation, the real being of the person is laid bare, and that mask is totally thrown off. And I think that was a really worthwhile thing. Like part of the reason why I work so hard is like that I'm like, I suppose there's some innate narcissism within me that wants to have this mask fomented, this perception of me fomented or whatever out there. But I also am totally aware of the idea that I could have like a stroke any moment and be reduced to like a drooling, blathering mass. And that terrifies me, but that I need to also be okay with that somehow. Exactly. And I don't know. I think if people checked out that podcast or whatever, it might make them a little bit more comfortable with the dying process. And understand this ambiguous condition that Simone talks about.
And I think that's what Ulysses S. Grant was getting at too, because he actually had throat cancer or something like that. So all he could do was write out things. Yeah. He couldn't actually speak. So he wrote out there like, I think I am a verb, and just like showed his doctor or something like that. And it's just, I think that's such an interesting kind of point, is that we do develop all these nouns like Jordan, the philosopher, Luke, the entrepreneur, CJ, the musician person.
We're all on Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, right. Yeah. At the heart of all of us, and what maybe we should always just like get down to maybe is the verb, is the tackling with the ambiguous condition.
It's very Eastern, is it not? Yeah, that we're all in sort of a state of becoming, that there isn't this fixed identity.
Yeah, and like we're all in a state of flux.
Yeah, I think you see this a lot I think you see it in a lot of the more poetic religious texts of Hinduism, and you see it in philosophers who have appropriated them, like Schopenhauer. And I mean, you could talk about it in regards to Hegel as well. The fact that there's this underlying thing that's becoming
maybe Heidegger. I don't know.
T.S. Eliot
T.S.
in
Eliot,
his poetry will make reference to it a lot, specifically in the four quartets, the Dry Salvages. As a poem I love, I would recommend to everybody. But yeah, so interesting stuff. All highlights the ambiguity of everything. Well, I mean, we're at like an hour. I mean, I think we got a good amount of stuff out there, and I guess we'll finish off the podcast next week, and then we'll maybe do a little bit more reflection and go into Kierkegaard for who knows how long. All right, is that it, guys?
Yeah.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Noetic. Go download the podcast or go download the app for your iPhone and your Droid, and take us anywhere and everywhere. All right. See you guys. Bye.